Hi there, everyone. Just checking in. Hello. Yes. Hi there. This is a messing around on a Friday. Um, we're traveling, so we're not at my usual bold reference. Um, my voice is kind of getting horsey, so please forgive that. Um, what to do? What to do? Today is going to be a weird, slow one because we're traveling and I don't have much to say in that terms of preparation. I've also been kind of dealing with some bullshit at university that's been kind of frustrating in that sense. Not in not in the U.S. but the Polish university. It just as I was away, it hit. I went with my wife to do something, and well, that's it. And I have to do a report. I was supposed to be doing a report anyways, but my research, all this bureaucratic bullshit. So therefore, we returned hopefully tomorrow back, and then I'll play catch up with. I'll start finishing up the videos for Schmidt's dictatorship. I have 4 more videos to do on the last chapter, and I'm not going to do the appendices. I might do it some future time, do the appendices for dictatorship, which focuses on the Weimar Constitution provisions. I only just don't think they're essential to the purposes of Schmidt as a political theorist. It might be useful to understand Schmidt as a constitutional theorist in that sense, but their usefulness for the understanding of Schmidt as a political theorist and a common, a thinker dealing with the history of ideas, which focus primarily on not primarily on the way liberal thought evolved in that sense. The idea of the modern state and how it emerged. So, and it appears I'll probably be looking at following once we finish Schmidt, I'll probably start doing Aristotle's Ethics, which I promised people to do. It's going to be it's going to be a weird project in the sense that I will do it chapter by chapter by chapter by chapter, and chapters are smaller, so the videos will be shorter. Hopefully, in that sense, or not necessarily. Hopefully, some chapters will be shorter than others. Some will be longer. So that's that. And then after that, I will turn to probably a redo of Machiavelli's Prince. So those are the future basic thrust of what I was going to plan to do in that sense for the upcoming December. And December is already going to be started. We're going to wrap up Schmidt and start Aristotle, and then probably the new year, sometime in the spring, we'll do the Machiavelli in that sense. In this way, my previous Machiavelli, we didn't really have the text on the screen. This is something I came to discover later. So that's not it. The only thing I'd like to talk about is, the theme that I'd like to talk about in that today is the role of the concept of if you look at Schmidt's his discussion of things. Schmidt's, I think, looking at what Schmidt has talked about. In fact, reading Schmidt at the same time as reading Rousseau has been very enlightening in that sense. Particularly as we turning now to the Rousseau, the Rousseau readings that are now coming available, which I've done already, are Rousseau's piece for the encyclopedia on basically political economy, which was the first thing he wrote that led to, this is the trajectory. I understand Rousseau, that writing the essay on political economy was at the time he was working in the house of Malby, Malby's brother, as the tutor of Malby's son. And Rousseau, under the influence of Malby, now Malby is one of these intellectual Jesuit priests who are intellectuals who really important to the development of Jesuit political thought, in which rationalist defense of state, defense of the rational ruler, the enlightened, rational, centralizing ruler. Malby becomes very, as Schmidt points out in Dictatorship, Malby's role in justifying and shaping the way the revolutionaries will think, the French revolutionaries, and critics of Louis XIV's administration model reframe the revolutionaries, reframing it in terms of the understanding of authority and power, right? Well, you can see how Malby really influences Rousseau in a sense. And you can see this in, if somebody who's going to study Rousseau would look at this. That's why the master's edition that I use has all three texts. It has the final version of the social contract. It has the Geneva manuscript, and it also has the essay on the political economy. And the political economy is that first time when Rousseau was working on his political institutions, the book that he never finished. And the term political institutions echoes the influence of Malby on very much Abbé Malby on Rousseau. And they had a long friendship in that sense. But at the same time, I think we also notice a difference that the earlier version, the Geneva manuscript version of the social contract, has this idea of a citizenship of humanity, and the idea that human beings are naturally good in that sense, which echoes what he asserts in the first discourse, the natural goodness of man, and how society and how conversions and things like this, how arts and crafts have corrupted men, right? That is the critique of that, and that was very much under the influence of Malby, Abbé Malby. It's Malby's understanding of the uniqueness and the goodness of man, and something that is absent. Schmidt highlights this, that in the social contract, of the final versions of the social contract we don't have Rousseau bringing in the concept of the natural goodness of man. And that therefore, that we have to revert man to its natural state in that sense, and to deconstruct the structures of a social power to revert man back to its natural state. Rousseau, social contract is the opposite. Rousseau seems to argue that man is improved by the state in that sense. Yes, and the only thing that corrupts man is in other words, it's not the state or the social structure that does it, but rather luxurious living and wealth and size, excessive growth and excessive size of a political community or social network that makes it so large that it enfeebles that it at one level it makes possible the rise of vast wealth and vast inequalities, right? And Rousseau seems to Malby thinks that this can be rationally overcome, and in the social contract, Rousseau doesn't seem to think it's rational. It's a limit, and I think this is in that sense. I think this is a very enlightening thing to see. Rousseau, you can see the early, in other words, the modern liberal reader conflates the early Rousseau of the first discourse and the naturalness, this idea, with his political teaching. And therefore there is this kind of conflation here. And then we see the influence of Rousseau on the revolutionary movement. But we have to understand that not only Rousseau's influence, yes, there was significant Rousseau influence on the Jacobins and particularly Robespierre on Rousseau, but also Malby had a similar influence on these people. In fact, more so in that sense, and more so on the revolutionary leaders as a whole. including the other influence of the whole physiocrats and the physiocrat tradition, which I think what is the most shocking thing when reading the Schmidt thing and the role of the physiocrats in legitimizing and defending, and this is particularly the chapter on 17th century, 18th century um, creation of the what do you call this 18th century creation of the sovereign dictator, right? This idea of the sovereign dictator in chapter 4, where he goes into this. The French physiocrats are very much a understanding of we can see today something this idea of liberal authoritarianism, in the sense centralization of power, the rational leader, the rationalized, rational system of justifying, legitimizing political authority, understanding state of power as a rational tool to understand it, and then the need for centralization and authority that Rousseau does not, really doubts in that sense, both early Rousseau and then the later Rousseau. Schmidt does a good account on that in that sense. I think Schmidt does an outstanding account in that in Dictatorship. And again, I'm going to recommend people go read Dictatorship. I'll go look at the video series again and go read it, because Schmidt does a very good service in shaping the way the historical tradition and the intellectual argument about power and institutional powers. In other words, he's looking at the way legal institutional power is doing it, and then the theoretical justifications of it. What's so interesting is when he discusses Wallerstein and the earlier part about this medieval part, he as he moved into the 30-Year War discussion, he moved from what we call intellectual justifications to kind of pure legal instrumentalist structures, looking at legal instruments and seeing these things within things, and then only when the next chapter 4, 3, wait, that's 2, 3, he starts going into the history, the thinkers about the English Reformation, the English in the 16th century, right? The 16th and 16th, 17th century, 16th, 17th century, the English political theory in that sense, the liberal tradition in that sense. And then it goes and then brings in that next trajectory. And then chapter 4 clearly deals with the, I think 4 deals with the way, the rational 16, 17, and then chapter 5 is the French Revolution, and chapter 6 is the state of siege, right? Which is going to be the last section dealt with, which I am going to last chapter dealt with in the Dictatorship. This conclusion of the Dictatorship as a book, excluding the appendices, and I will look at that, and I divided it into 5 parts. So I did, I've only have the last 4 parts to record now. This is why I think it's been very interesting in that sense, and why it's interesting for others in that sense, particularly those who want to understand things like the administrative state and things like this we talk about today, and the understanding of state power and why the state structure does what it does, and why the evolution, how and actually, what's so interesting about this is to understand the European tradition, the continental European tradition of centralized state structures. One has to see it in light of the French Revolution, and the way the French Revolution radically centralizes. So the whole argument in Tocqueville that we get in Tocqueville about the fear of administrative centralization, the danger of it, how administrative centralization and this democratic majority despotism go along together, right? And Tocqueville's Democracy in America, right? You can see this. Schmidt highlights that, how that emerged because of the structure of the French Revolution and the role of the revolutionary commissars, and how they they revolutionized and altered the way and centralized, heavily centralized, administratively centralized the French state. And the combination of the destruction of the older traditional structures to the kind of Enlightenment rationalization and departmentalization of France, then and the changing structure of a quasi-patrimonial, in other words, the old feudal appointment. Yes, King Louis centralizes with the transferring the governments from the local dukes and lords to his in other words, his the intendants, right? The intendants, as Schmidt calls it, the intendants who appointed, but they were it was a feudal position, though. So whereas it was still nevertheless structured within a framework of a monarchy of feudal positions, and therefore there was a person there. And what happened with the revolutionary commissars, the impersoned intendant was replaced by the revolutionary commissar, who was acting as a kind of now Schmidt talks about this, is that the sovereign dictator was the National Convention, right? This is the convention that authorizes this. And what is the commissars are? These are commissarial dictators in that sense. But these are persons still at first. And then what happens is then they embody, meant to have authorized complete discussion, centralizing power at that level. In other words, make that. And then what they did was the creation of the Committee of Public Safety, centralizing it even more, right? Now, before it was reporting to the whole convention, and therefore the members thought they were equal to this. Now the Committee of Public Safety controls and regulates them, and then authorizes them. While they regulate them, they authorize even more power. Okay, and to delegate and to create agents underneath them, and then who not only report to them, but also over time they becomes. In other words, and this is all justified in case of emergency situations of the counter-revolution, as well as the threat from the outside powers, right? Schmidt is explaining the evolution and construction of the dynamic of state bureaucratic structures, centralized bureaucratic structures. And then he talks about how normalization then leads to a situation where there's no more need to have discretion at this commissarial level. So the commissarials are removed, and that the director and subdirector, the people who are there, report directly to the committee, the committee at the national level, and this then later becomes the ministries. Okay, so therefore, what ends up happening is, and then when there's future commissarials are sent, usually at the ministerial level, is done to basically just inspect and police and maintain. Schmidt says they move from being commissars of reformation or commissars of action to commissars of service. They're designed to kind of maintain and oversee and make sure that those local bureaucrats are doing what they're supposed to be doing under the system. So therefore, there's, as he says, as the thing becomes more centralized, the structure of state authority becomes more powerful, more omnipotent. And this is the verge of the structure of how the evolution of the continental model of the state, centralized state, emerges. And this is where I think Schmidt does a very good service. Now, we can argue that Schmidt then shows how the English, he tries to show how the English Revolution did a similar thing in the sense of power, but at another level, he doesn't really develop the English examples clearly. And he doesn't give us a kind of genealogy. He gives a genealogy of the European French model, which then becomes the continental model. he doesn't give the same genealogy. He gives us the account of the English Civil War and the rise of Cromwell and the way um, Cromwell's model of this was kind of like more like not like he says a sovereign dictatorship, but rather more like this idea that had more in other words, Cromwell's vision of his role as protector, although granted from Parliament originally. He then dissolves the Long Parliament, and then he then tries to inculcate, but he doesn't understand it in terms of that the people represent him, but rather his mission is a called mission. He is called from God to do it, right? So therefore, that Schmidt makes the point that um, that the thinking of Milton and also Cromwell about Cromwell's legitimization is a providential calling, and therefore, in that sense, echoes what Bossuet, the great thinker of divine rights of kings, argued about moral power. So, in other words, and then the role Bossuet had in shaping not only the French monarchs but also the Scottish monarchs, James VI, and subsequently his son Charles. Okay. That therefore the framework of what Schmidt does in that chapter is very outstanding in purpose of to understand what we're doing and the structure. And I think this is a very interesting thing that we see that the crown centralizes to a degree, and this becomes the thing that I think Schmidt corrects kind of the Weberian argument. He kind of hints at something that I think something like the debate between Starkey and Elton about the English crown. About Elton basically agrees with Weber and argues that the Etonian, what Elton says is that Tudor basically creates the new modern state, the crown, and but then treats it as the end state. Okay, doesn't see it as an evolutionary progress. That yes, this begins. He kind of understands it. He kind of phrases it in a Hegelian way. That once the possibility is possible, then the alternative is no longer valid. Right? This is the dialectical thinking, and Eaton seems to be working in kind of dialectical logic, and this is why Starkey's David Starkey. David Starkey's critique of his promoter about this, saying that no, this is that the civil service still Henry VIII is still kind of his own personality, and his power is still personal power. Yes, there's institutional and so this double, but there is this struggle here, this dualism. It's not that this has been replaced by that immediately, which Eaton seems to suggest. Eaton, I would say Elton's argument. Elton is ultimately right in terms of what will emerge, right? But it's not already set. It started, but has not fully encompassed, and therefore, in Henry VIII, the contradictions of this emergence is present still. And I think this is Starkey's point. And I think this is how we should understand this. And therefore, to understand the emergence of the British constitutional state, something that Schmidt isn't interested, because Schmidt sees it merely as parliamentary. And he understands it in terms of the legislative state structure and doesn't really understand it, in that he wants to dismiss it as the pluralist model. And there was the combination at one level, depends on what work you're looking at. In the parliamentary model, he will look at it as, okay, this is in his book on constitutional theory, he looks at it as the bourgeois Reichstag, the right state, right, and his liberalism and legality and legitimacy. He will look at the British system as a parliamentary state, also a liberal Reichstag in that sense. And then in his dictatorship, he doesn't really, he just sees, he's only interested in England from the point of view of understanding this Cromwell moment of this crisis of how does this structure emerge and the revolutionary structure emerge. Because he's really at this stage trying to prepare a discussion of revolutionary, in other words, how do we move, how does the state handle transitions from one form to another form, or how do we deal with this question, and how do you evolve a system in that sense? He talks about it earlier in his discussion of the chapters, the first part of chapter 2A, part A, the first one, where he deals with basically how how the German states, and particularly Prussia, and other German states in the 30-Year Wars, the Kaiser, the Holy Roman Emperor tried to, address the crisis of the rebellion and the negative aspect of Reformation and dealing with that, and the way at the same time that Prussia modernized, and the Prussian structure of war, and the way war, there's a context, both in times of the 30-Year War creates the need to fund and organize the armies. In other words, the non-military dimension of warcraft, and the logistics, and the organization and funding, and all these things, and these need to organize it more centrally, becomes the basis by which the state emerges. So again, this is something that Charles Tilly even talks about in his work on the emergence of nation states. And I think you go look at Charles Tilly and Michael Feiner, both Samuel Feiner, the English historian Samuel Feiner, the American sociologist, political sociologist, Charles Tilly. Tilly talks about France. He writes many books about France and the development of the French monarchy. And he explains how looking at the French monarchy, you see how warfare shapes the centralization model. Mostly, it's more obvious in the 30-year model, the Germanic 30-year case, and the Prussians are the best example of this in that sense. And Schmidt knows this, and that's why Schmidt focuses the way on this. This is why the 30-Year War is so important for him, because we see the transition from a kind of the feudal system, which in legality and legitimacy is understood as this. What is it? It's oh god, I forgot the word title. It's not constrained. It's jurisdictional state. In other words, as jurisdictions and authorities, and there's intermediate entities. In other words, that when and using the metaphor of that Christ, body of Christ, and the role as a vicar of Christ, the Pope is the intermediary, and the idea of intermediaries as the structure of political rule shapes the medieval world and the medieval construction. And if you understand the role of intermediation and the role of intermediating bodies have in the way, and then the whole problems, Schmidt talks right that first chapter of that, the whole question of how the church debate of papal powers and the plenitude of powers against the emperor, and the conciliarist debate, all this question that happened in the Middle Ages that shapes the origins of this debate, that first it begins in church law and then carries over into monarchical debates, and structure of the secular world. What is first talked about as a centralizing of papal power and the plenitude of papal power to exercise and overcome jurisdictional control, then carries over to the state in that sense, the secular, the political element. So that you have a centralization in the papacy, then leads us to a centralization within the secular authority of the Reich. And first the kings, monarchs, and then Kaiser. The Kaiser never really fully centralized. That's the whole tragedy of in I think Schmidt's view of the Austrian king, that it was a lost opportunity. because he feared the competing powers of Wallerstein and other people. And he feared, in other words, that's the whole point, that it was a Machiavellian, be careful of, making other people stronger than you, right? That famous line, Machiavelli. And that therefore the emperor feared that, and therefore didn't want to give that power to any, because remember, the empire was so large, and that if to do what the centralization it required, it would actually give the delegated person or responsible for that excessive power, as Wallerstein had, and it threatened the imperial court and the other imperial stakeholders. And Schmidt goes into that very well, and I think in the chapter on Wallerstein, chapter 2, part 2. So therefore, I'm talking right now a little bit about the dictatorship thing, because I think this is worth reflecting on in that sense. I don't know how many people will be interested in that talk in that sense. The other thing I'd like to, in my, we've been on for about a half hour, so, and there's not many people here today, so, it must be lousy weather, and it's about that. So it's lousy weather here, and people became sick. Everyone's getting sick, apparently. Well, what else to talk about? So that's the Schmidt thing and that thing. Well, but let's think about this. This is a real interesting thing and political, that there is a competing understanding of state power that is centralized in the Europeanized model, and that the Austrian model, and hence Germanic model of this, is more federal, always was more federal in that sense. And the creation of the problem with the Austrians was they never developed it. The Austrians, as they left the Hoyland Empire and becoming the Austro-Hungarian Empire, they never federalized. Where, to some extent, the Prussian-led unification to create the German Reich did federalize to some degree. They centralized on military matters, but for a lot of political and administrative aspects, they allowed it to, because it was always done to compromise with the princes. It wasn't done through the people, and that's a very interesting point in that sense. In other words, if we look at the way the Kaiserreich was the creation of the German nation, or the political form of the Reich, of the German thing, was completely done antithetically to the tradition of the nationalists. The nationalists were liberals in that sense. The German nationals were fundamentally liberals, who were children of the French Revolution, who one of the, this idea of popular, French Revolution destroys the old aristocratic feudal structures and releases the idea that the people should rule. But the problem with the French Revolution was, the reality was that the French Revolution, when it liberated the German states from their feudal lords, it basically meant French rule, not the people's rule in that sense. Then it gave rise to ethnic self-determination, that if people had a right to determine themselves, the ethnic self-determination. So therefore, we went from near the concept of general popular sovereignty, that the logic of the French Revolution, as the people are the sovereign authority, the builder of the nation, the builders of society. Then it particularizes on this people, and the longing of the Germans for a unified nation was a liberal dream in that sense. It was a liberal agenda, and it was done by the liberal wing, which saw itself in terms of kind of, imitating the aspects from the French Revolution. Again, this is that line that Weimar, and again, Bismarck in his reflections and his table talks really point about this as a choice for Weimar is a choice for the French, and the German mind subordinating itself to the French rational mind. And I think this is something that we should take seriously in that sense. That therefore there was this, we should look at, I think there needs to be more thinking about the way in other words, the creation of the German model was not French revolutionized. we could say that this is the thing Schmidt, I think, is talking about in that sense. And that what happens is that the liberal thinkers are imposing a liberal, in other words, this is the Stadler tradition of the Stadler or state theory tradition that emerges from here was very much shaped by the Rousseau and Kant and this tradition of and Hegel too, by the French Revolution, and the kind of critique of, particularly Rousseau's critique of the early Enlightenment thinking, the rationalist Enlightenment thinking of Hobbes, Locke, but also of the physiocrats, and they, to some sense to Descartes as well, and Voltaire, that fundamentally alters the structure of what emerges, and that if we're both Kant and Hegel coming out of seeing the critique that is in Rousseau of like this rationality and trying to overcome it. This is in different directions. One is deontological and one is ontological, right? That Hegel's ontologically doing it ontologically, and Kant is doing deontologically, right? And of two different trajectories of idealism, which will then remodel the construct. I mean, we can argue that it's a constructivist structure. In other words, we look at the French Revolutionary State as a construction of this event of the rational state in that sense, and that thus Hegel and that will take it. But again, this is within a German liberal tradition in this sense, even though Hegel is both Kant and Hegel have to kind of keep the liberalism down. Go look at Hegel's student Fichte. Fichte is a very much liberal until it's their defeat, right? Fichte's famous the idea of natural right, which is influenced by Kant heavily. The book on I think it's Nature of Natural Right. I think it's one of the early essays about the idea of the constitutional state and constitution, how Fichte's thought. But then later he will write with the letter to the German nation, and the role that that in one sense someone we look at the origins of national structures. Schmidt will say it's not going to be done by great thinkers. It's going to be done by more second-rate thinkers like Fichte and Herder than anything else. The idea of the nation as a political form. This is something we have to confront with. That none of the key major thinkers, even Rousseau, doesn't really distinguish the nation as a separate entity from a body of people, society. That its nation is another word for society, a particular society in that sense. It's not an organic structure. It is simply a construct of individual agents in that sense, where you see in Fichte and in Herder, you see a breach. You see the role, particularly Herder, with regards of the role of culture and the irrational, right, shaping into the development of how a nation emerges. This also leads us to the problems of what does the population means, right? What is the people? How does the people consciousness? How do we understand the formation of information of people? I mean, that's the other thing, that once both in Hegel and Kant, you have the problem of the general will, okay, that emerges from Rousseau, and then it starts with Diderot, but it emerges from Rousseau's understanding of it, and the idea of the general will is the constituting power, right? The power that constitutes things. It is the power that generates the unification of that legitimizes and creates the political form and the constitutional the state. The body is the state, and like the general will, it's omnipotent and it's arbitrary. It's not controlled by anything. That it makes justice. It is not constrained by justice. Thus, it echoes very much the view of Hobbes as sovereign, but it differentiates from it in that for Hobbes, the sovereign can be, in other words, sovereignty can be transferred through representation. Again, this is Malby would agree with him on that. People like Malby and other physiocrats will agree with Hobbes that that's possible. But Rousseau, no, it doesn't. It's not. It's inalienable. It cannot. That the power, this thing always maintains it and cannot transfer it in that sense. And again, you see that in Rousseau, and this is why he says sovereignty is not inalienable. It is not, divided. It can't be divided. It can't be transmission. And he makes that, that famous image of the Chinese chopping the baby up and making the baby appear again. That again is why Rousseau wants to always emphasize sovereignty cannot be divided, because the general will cannot be divided. Because once you divide the general will, it's no longer general, right? That's the whole point. And once we understand that, we get into what Schmitt talks about, and this is all through chapter 5, the problem of the constituting power. And this is the thing that drives the question of what is the constituting power in that sense. Now, it's a sad thing. Schmitt is engaging with Zeidig's book on the form, the creation of the constituting power. Well, a book that's not been an essay or a book that's never been translated in English. David Kelly wrote a piece of it about it in a book a couple years ago, 2014, in a volume by this Oxford University. Oxford University has traditional constitutions. These were outrageously priced books, collections of essays from European academics funded by the EU, talking about the constitutionalism, right? And the power of the question of the constituting power, or the constituent power. The French word, of course, constituant, pouvoir constituant. Why? It's because this is the power. This is like God. This is the omnipotent power that creates the Constitution. Again, this is important because of the debate in the early 2000s about the European Constitution. And all constitutional lawyers have to deal with the question of what is the body that authorizes and legitimates and creates the state. Where does the authority of the state rise? Where does the authority to create the state and create the Constitution rise? And this is the concept, the power that is able to make fan of it. In fact, the metaphor is God, the creator versus the created, right? That the organs of state, the Constitution and the organs of state are constituted. They are organs. Organs are substance that are real and substantive. They're particular. They're concrete. They're within a frame of something. Therefore, whereas the constituting power, or the constituted, not past tense, but the power that can constitute. It's there. It's the potential. It doesn't have a form yet. It's omnipotent. It's formless. It is permanent, and it's free. It's literally free in this sense. It is not bound or controlled by anything. It's absolute freedom in this sense. In that sense, it has no bounding control. It's not bounded by anything. It has. Therefore, this is legitimate. This is why Schmitt talks about why all concepts of sovereignty rests on Christian theories of godhood, and this is absolutely correct. This is that whole problem about the question of the creator and the created, and that will define the structure of our political thinking, and basically in the modern world. And I think this may be the problem. This leads us to the problem of omnipotent state power. The idea of this, we don't understand it as it's the constituting power is this collective aspect of our individual. Again, it's still individualized. It's all these individual willing agencies that form to create that form the body politic, right? That form that moment, that create that this will, this entity that is collective. How do you form it? This has a metaphysics. This is a ontological, metaphysical construct of this thing, and I think this is the question we have to ask: is this really is this the proper way? Does our understanding of the divine shape our understanding of politics? And I think it does, to some degree. and therefore the human beings wishing to through our wills that we are gods individually, that we are willing entities and have the power to create like gods, and therefore we create this in that sense. And I think this is the, and this is, I think, Nietzsche's warning in that sense, right? Against that. We've killed God. We don't believe in God in that sense, but we then still believe in God in our institutions and the way we operate and the way we do things, the way we think about the world, and the way we think about power, the way we think about the nature of the political form and the omnipotence of the political form in that sense. And I think this is very eye-opening. That, in other words, you can see the theological political construct within Schmitt struggle with it in a way that it's not about political Catholicism. I think this is a misreading, understanding it as political Catholicism. I think it's a superficial reading of Schmitt, seeing him as a defensor of political thing. Yes, he talks about such issues because he's interested in that, because he's interested in the traditions that emerge the anti-revolutionary, anti-French, anti-liberal writers and thinkers that emerged in the 19th century, reacting against the triumph of the French Revolution and the modern liberal state that came in by Catholic thinkers. But it's not understood in terms of Catholic thinking. It's not theologically motivated. It is that the concern is how to respond to the liberal state, the liberal rocks, or the modern state and its structure and how it emerges and the contradictions that come into it. And these contradictions then lead to problems. Okay? I think that's Schmitt. Schmitt sees within the liberal tradition and the contradictions that the liberal tradition takes within a framework of the way state power has evolved in Europe over times, and the way then the liberal ideas then graft on to these things, and that the contradictions of the two then manifest itself and then create problems. Like this is the way he highlights it. Well, that's been the thought. I don't want to keep on talking that much. It's I think I'll call it quick today. There's been only 3 people coming on off, no questions. So I didn't get any questions in the thing. If you have any questions or concerns, please put them in the things you want me to talk about, or issues that you'd like me to address in a future messing around. I hope I'm in a better mood. We'll see. This is winter. This is the winter of our discontent. In Central Europe, vampire weather. The skies are wet and overcast, and no sun. It becomes dark as we go into December. Late November, December. It's dark by 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock, and there's never, And you go to school in the morning or something like this. It's just hardly any light, and it's overcast. Might be vampire weather, right? Hardly uplifting in that sense. So if you have any comments, questions, or concerns about these issues, please put them in there. Some questions or thoughts of what you want like to see highlighted or talk about and developed. I've been really thinking I should go back and do the Burnham thing a little bit more about, I hit on it, but people don't really respond to it. I'm not surprised in that sense. I was going to try to do a book video, but I didn't feel like it, honestly. I was not in any video production move this week at all. So I've been away, and even away, I'd do it like something, maybe do something at the a way I can do something, but it was not me. So if you have any like it, don't like it. Okay, I see so far we have 1 person liking it, so we'll see how many happens. Comments, questions. If you're not subscribed, please subscribe. You can follow me on social media, links below. There's also my academic social media to see what I'm up to, but I've been these past 2 months, I've not been waiting. I'm waiting on 2 reviews and things like this, and I'm kind of nervous about it. I have 2 or 3 papers I can work on, but again, this past 2 weeks, 3 weeks have been just completely It's demoralizing in that sense. And that's it. Uh, you can, if you want to help me to do what I do, Patreon, subscribe star. I understand if you don't want to do it. Okay, fine. And if you again grow the channel, share it, and get people might be interested. Sorry, I'm talking low and loud. I'm not like screaming like I'm in a different room, and the sounds are not as good and effective as I could be. So take care. It's now 50 minutes. It's going long enough. I don't see people really coming in, and I don't have anything else to plan to talk about. Well, take care and have a good day. Bye bye.